We're survivors. We've got to get that train moving.
Resident Evil 3 is a perfect game for our current crisis, as it's a terrible advert for going outside. Outside there is fire. Outside dogs will eat you. Outside medical professionals take your pulse with their teeth. And worst of all, outside there is a donut shop which won't sell you donuts because the donut chef is dead. Umbrella are going to pay for this crime against snacks. Okay, so inside is pretty drab, but at least there's chill music. And a giant box for stockpiling, more medicinal herbs than toilet rolls sadly, and a typewriter should you finally want to start work on that novel you've always dreamed of. More importantly, Resident Evil 3 offers the ultimate distraction from whatever ails you, a 10-foot tall nightmare who resembles a walking bin bag, but cannot be neatly removed by placing him into the nearby trash receptacle. This is Nemesis, one of gaming's most legendary villains, and the main reason I've been excited for Resident Evil 3. After all, when you think of what an amazing job Capcom did with Mr. X in Resident Evil 2, who was a very similar monster pursuer, the idea of this expanded to a game-long escape sequence is pretty tasty. Do they fundamentally deliver? Well, yes and no. It kinda depends on what you are hoping for. I'll break it down in this review. I should add our review copy came with a list of things we can't talk about, a list that is longer than a looker's tongue. Honestly, by the time I've removed that information, all I can really tell you is that the game also features Carlos and this vending machine. I thought the spoiler concerns were quite odd until I actually played it. Turns out Resident Evil 3 is easy to spoil because there's not much of it. I got through the campaign in 6 hours in my first standard playthrough, and that was really taking my time to find the secrets, documents and upgrades. A hard playthrough came in just above 4, and to get the higher ranks you need to halve that. I mention this up front as it's an important detail in a game that costs £50 or $60 on Steam. I'll address it a bit later, but I understand if you want to duck out now to avoid seeing any of the environments or enemies from the mid-game area. I've also not tested the final version of Resident Evil Resistance, which is the online 4 vs 1 multiplayer, as it's important to play these things with the public to see how they really function. So these are just campaign thoughts for now. If Resident Evil 2 was the rookie's first day, then Resident Evil 3 is a grizzled veteran back for one last job. Jill Valentine has seen this crap before and can support the weight of a heavier action game on her ludicrously well-rendered shoulders. I mean, she's got more believable skin than I do. Point is, Resident Evil 3 piles on the pressure in a way that Resident Evil 2 didn't. Crowd control is vital when fighting hordes of street zombies, presumably as pissed off about the donut situation as I am. And rooms of massacred bodies have a nasty habit of jumping to their feet at the same time, making me nervously prod every corpse I find. Thank God the knife won't break this time. In Jill's favour, Raccoon City Council have invested in convenient explosive barrels for kiting enemies into a fiery massacre. You can't see it in this capture, but if you play with HDR lighting, the brightness of the flames is so blinding, you genuinely have to wait for them to die down before continuing on. I'm not sure if that's great or irritating, but it looks painful and that's what counts. Weirdly, these explosive assists pretty much vanish once you leave the streets a couple of hours in. I guess it makes sense to shift the focus to precision gunplay in the later hours, but I did miss making miniature bonfires. Jill also retains her dodge move from the original game, which is a very accurate impression of me trying to escape a wasp. This is handy for scampering back from zombie grabs or leaping away from those damn dogs. Timing it with precision pulls off a perfect dodge that lets you enter a bullet time aim and pull off a gooey headshot, although the timing on this is pretty tight. I like that Jill is more competent than Leon and Claire, and it gives the game its own vibe rather than feeling like a simple expansion pack for Resident Evil 2, which was a concern I had when I played a preview build earlier in the year.
I don't got time for this!
The action thrust is even more obvious in an expanded role for Carlos, who made a short playable cameo in the original, but now gets to waft his lovely hair through 2 substantial chapters. Compared to Jill's sections, these are straight up massacres. He has an assault rifle and is exploring linear corridors where it's hard not to hit his targets. These scenes actually remind me more of the dumb blockbuster shootouts of Resident Evil 6 than anything in Resi 2. It's a reference that may chill the blood of some fans, but as one ingredient in the overall action cocktail, it's quite welcome. Having lots of ammo to empty into zombies feels like the moments in earlier games where you unlock powerful guns for completing it, except here you don't have to wait for the second playthrough to test them out. There's even an extended siege scene that had me thinking of the cabin fight in Resident Evil 4, which is the holy grail of suspense shootouts. And in Carlos's ridiculous enemy shunt, his version of Jill's dodge, there's even a tiny hint of Leon's roundhouse kicks in Resident Evil 4. The end result is that his sections are a much more important part of the story, and come the final stretch of the game, his interplay with Jill feels more earned as a result. Of course, there are 3 people in this action marriage, but the third one is more interested in the death do us part bit. Nemesis himself has the strangest overhaul of any part of Resident Evil 3. In many ways, he's incredibly simplified compared to his 1999 version. You are no longer given multiple choices that affect the outcome of the story or the course of the game. It's a linear path and Nemesis turns up at fixed points. Secondly, there are not many moments where he hunts you around the map. Outside of downtown, his appearances are contained set pieces or boss fights. You spend less time running away from him than you did Mr. X in Resident Evil 2 Remake. This is partly down to the increased role of Carlos. Nemesis only chases Jill, so old floppy hair is safe. But it's also due to how the Nemesis design evolves. I'm not going to spoil it, but it does explain why he can't be stomping after you. I'd be fascinated to know why Capcom redesigned him so radically. Maybe they thought we'd had our fill of escaping from a stompy murder man in Resident Evil 2. But that's odd, as Nemesis is different to Mr. X. He's faster, he can charge after you, he can pull Jill with a tentacle, and he has a nasty habit of jumping down from rooftops and surprising you. Escaping from him is more of a panicked rush, and you feel breathless as you dodge under his fists or way up throwing explosives in the hope of stalling him. But once boss fights begin to dominate his appearances, all that tension vanishes. You can play parts of the game and forget about him entirely, which is something that never happened in the original. It begins to make sense why they dropped his name from the title. Nemesis isn't the main event. Is this a deal breaker? To be honest, I'm torn. What Nemesis does do is definitely fun. Capcom know how to build a killer boss fight, and the changing art design is spectacular. But I am sad that they are more interested in cinematic thrills. There are Nemesis escape scenes where you just press forward, and that's really not very exciting. If you want a survival horror experience with an intriguing AI pursuer, I'm not sure this delivers. If you want an action game with a cool recurring villain, you'll get much more out of it. While I'm curious about what dedicated fans will think of new Nemesis, I'm generally confident they will love other changes. As you've probably gathered, there are substantial tweaks to the story, and the order of events and locations is mixed up in fun ways.
Alright, you want me to keep out? I'll keep out.
One thing the game does really well is tie the events of Resident Evil 2 and 3 together. They were always linked by time and location in the originals, but Capcom are a lot more playful with it here.
Now here's a weird fucking door.
Leave it! We're here for bars.
A trip to Raccoon City Police Department before the events of Resident Evil 2 is a great use of last year's phenomenal remake. Seeing those familiar corridors but hitting rewind is very cool and explains much of the mess when Leon and Claire eventually rock up. I love that you can use your knowledge of puzzles from Resident Evil 2 to take some shortcuts here, even if I'm pretty certain it causes some time paradoxes along the way.
Right. Big, warm RPD welcome.
Another thing, and this may just be a personal bugbear, but returning to older locations also shows off how much improved Raccoon City's design is in this later game. Compare the dense, detailed streets of downtown with this great expanse of empty tarmac outside the police department. They almost look like different games. As much as I love the connective tissue between Resident Evil 2 and 3, they are different in vital ways. I mentioned the action drive, but it's deeper than individual shootouts. If Resi 2 is an investigation, Resi 3 is an escape, and those are very different things. Resident Evil 3 is driven by set pieces, not just the Nemesis encounters, but self-contained blips that take familiar scenes from the original, but give them a bit of a kick. The best example is a quite boring power station voltage puzzle being turned into a maze of drained demos. A simple switch flicking exercise becomes something nightmarish as the scuttling creatures impregnate Jill with eggs that will burst if you can't find a cure. It's a stunningly unpleasant animation. And a great indicator of the campaign to follow, one that has you unloading flame grenades into sewer abominations 1 second, and then dodging rockets like an ultra-violent Crash Bandicoot level the next. Only a couple of areas let you really explore and sniff out hidden secrets, none as big as the police department in Resident Evil 2, think more along the lines of the underground labs. But while I miss immersing myself in larger locations, the speed they flash by does give the impression of a bigger game than the short runtime suggests. It's small but dense, and you definitely come out the other end feeling like you've seen some real shit go down, which is kind of what I want from Resident Evil. Question is it enough to justify that price tag? A lot of this depends on the kind of player you are. If you are a one and done campaign completer, you'd be mad to spend £50 on this. If you are a completionist on the other hand, well, you've got multiple difficulties to tackle and achievements to unlock, some offering fun ways of approaching the game, speed running or not using certain items. There are unlockables tied into ticking off achievements, again, no spoilers, which adds further reason to dip back in. I do wish the campaign had the original's branching decisions to make later visits a bit more engaging, but it would be wrong to say there's nothing beyond the credits. And there's always the promise of resistance. What I played in preview didn't exactly do it for me, and I'd kill for a proper mercenaries mode instead, but it's definitely not flimsy. I just keep thinking of how Resident Evil used to be the gold standard of post-game unlockables, and Resident Evil 3 definitely isn't that, but people who like a challenge will get closer to their money's worth. This is an odd game for sure, incredible fan service and production values. As you can see from this footage, it's stonkingly good looking on PC with incredibly granular graphic settings that pretty much let you adjust Jill right down to individual follicles. But it's a game that is in such a rush to deliver thrills that it loses sight of its villain along the way. Of course, when the villain is doing stuff like this to you, maybe losing sight of him is a good thing. I undoubtedly had a good time in Resident Evil 3, but it feels a bit more muddled than 2 and nowhere near the action peaks of Resident Evil 4, but that's one of my favourite games of all time. As a diversion from the nightmare outside our own front doors, the nightmare outside of Jill's will do just fine. I hope you've enjoyed this Resident Evil 3 review. If you did, I'd love to get a thumbs up and for you to write something kind in the comments. Every little helps in these days of doom and gloom. I'd obviously love it if you also subscribe to Rock Paper Shotgun. We try to cover all the biggest PC releases, and please do look at my recent reviews of Doom Eternal and Ori and the Will of the Wisps for a flavour of what we do. I always appreciate people watching as far as this, so here's a picture of my lovely cat having a snooze as a reward. And please do remember, clean your hands, fulfilling life comes from good health, and take good care of yourself. Bye for now.